Good morning. I'm Allison Block-Chavez. I'm the Vice Chair of the Young Lawyers Division, and I'm here with Kendall O. Schlenker, who is a practicing lawyer here in Albuquerque and practicing over 60 years. And we are here for an oral history interview. So good morning, Mr. Schlenker. How are you doing?
Good morning. I would like to say that the material I'm holding is something I prepared for my 50th anniversary for the practice of law, which was in 2007. And in 2 days, I will have been admitted to the New Mexico bar for 61 years.
Wow.
And, if it's all right, I would just kind of like to go through this outline that I prepared for the award of the 50th anniversary.
Sure, and just to note, today is August 13th, 2018, so in 2 days that'll be August 15th, 2018.
There you are. And,
Sure, so go ahead and go through your outline, and then we can go back and I might have some more questions for you.
all right. I was born May 12th of 1933 in the Ray community in West Texas, which was a German community started by my grandfather and some other German farmers from Polk County, Iowa. And the XIT Ranch was where they moved, and the XIT Ranch was a property acquired in about 1875 by the Syndicate Land Company of Chicago in exchange for building the state capitol building for the Republic of Texas. And the building got built, but cost a lot more than expected, and the land ran at a price of about $1 an acre, which was outrageously high at that time. And the ranch stayed until about 2002, and then started to be sold off. And so, but I was born out there, as were a lot of my family still around that area. And then the next thing I particularly remember is we, like a lot of other families, moved to California during the war, for the war effort, as it was called then, and my education in high school was at Portales, and then I went to Eastern New Mexico University, and then to the UNM Law School, and then after practicing a while, I got interested in taxation and went back to New York University and received an LLM in taxation from NYU.
So you mentioned you were raised in Portales. Was there anything about your early childhood that influenced your direction in your life?
Yes, I would say that I had, by the time I was out of high school, I had been convinced by some of my school teachers that I might want to consider going to law school. And so we had a judge there, Judge Hensley, who was our district judge there, and he later was one of the first judges appointed to the New Mexico Court of Appeals. He invited me to his courtroom to hear some cases, and I kind of enjoyed what I was seeing there and thought I might really be interested. And so when I began college, it was already in that direction of going to law school. And at that time, you could enter law school with 2 years, but during my second year, they changed that to 3 years. And there was one law school in the United States that would admit me with the 2 years, but I didn't have the money. I was playing football and basketball to afford to go to school anyway.
Oh,
so
wow.
I stayed there at at Eastern, and then Eastern later let me count my first year in law school as electives because I'd had the majors and minors that I would set out for, and then at law school I came right on to law school, and my wife Wilda, whom I had married just before going to law school, she came and taught school for me to go to law school, and that worked out very well for me especially.
Mm-hmm.
And we got acquainted with some people that we later would run across in our life, and that was Judge Sam Bratton Sr., who remembered my German relatives over there in West Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And then his daughter Sammy, who was the principal of the school where my wife taught. And then later I became very well acquainted with Judge Howard Bratton, and I believe I tried a couple of tax cases to Howard Bratton, and but they did. I did know for a long time that I wanted to go to law
Mm-hmm.
school. Yeah.
Were there any professors either at Eastern New Mexico University or UNM that were role models for you, or that who inspired you?
I would say so. There was a fellow named Tiny Reed at Eastern, and then so far as the lawyers and so forth, Judge Hensley there in Portales, and then I've got along very well with the dean of the law school, who was Dean Gazowitz, and then one of my favorite professors was a fellow named Pete Riggs, who was a Yale graduate, and another one was Jerry Walden, and then Dave Vernon, who later was the dean of a law school in Washington and then later Iowa. And in fact, when I went back to NYU, the dean of the law school was a fellow named Vern Countryman, and he and Dave Vernon were able to get me some money to help me pay for that experience back in New York. And when I came back from New York, the dean of the law school was a fellow named Tom Christopher, and we became good friends and fishing buddies until he passed away several years later. Yeah.
What courses in law school or activities really interest you or impacted you?
Well, I knew absolutely little about taxes and had no experience really, but my father-in-law was a fairly well-to-do man, and I knew I could help him a lot if I really knew something about the taxes, and so I later, I think, would think the corporate tax law, and I in fact later in life, after graduating from NYU, I did teach a couple tax courses at the Anderson School at the University of New Mexico, and they dealt with corporate tax, partnership, and then trust and estates. And then while I was there, I added to it the estate and gift tax program, and but that was only a couple of years that I did that, and yeah, that would be that.
So before you went to New York, what was your first job as an attorney?
Well, before I was an attorney, in my third year in law school, I and two other law students, one Oliver Payne and a fellow named B.J. Stevens, who were quite a bit older than I was, we were hired as law clerks for the New Mexico Supreme Court. and I was the law clerk for Judge Eugene B. Lujan Jr., who was the chief judge, and we had probably the oldest court in the world at that time, and they were Judge Lujan and Judge Sadler, who I don't believe had graduated from a law school, Judge McGee, Judge Compton, who was from my hometown in Portales, and at that time a judge named Schilling, who was from Las Vegas, New Mexico, and but I also had been selected as to go into the Air Force JAG. I applied for that, thinking that we should, that I should serve some military time because I had been deferred all those years, and so the thing about the law school, when I was sort of disappointed I couldn't go with the 3 years, I really found out that that was a concession to the Korean veterans more than anything else, fixing that date for the law school, and so I started in 1954. Yeah.
Law school. And then what was your experience like as a clerk on the Supreme Court?
Well, we got had a little bit of experience, and I wrote help the judge with some decisions, and I can still remember the cases, and so I think Oliver Payne and B.J. Stevens, and then all of the judges are long gone, they're deceased, and but then when I went to Farmington to practice law, just temporarily waiting to go into the Air Force JAG, I had a case to argue before the Supreme Court, and my law partner at that time had me argue it because I was very familiar with the court and the clerks and everybody over there. So that was a wonderful experience to me to get to do something like that right out of law school. Yeah.
And what was that case? Do you remember it?
Yes, it was a town of Farmington versus A. Marlowe Miller. And I also tried a companion case in the federal court to Judge Waldo Rogers. And the other lawyer on the same side that I was on was A.H. McLeod, and then my friend Russell Moore, who was in the Kelleher law firm at that time.
So were you successful?
We were successful in both of the cases, yeah.
And then sounds like you soon went into the Air Force JAG.
Well, actually, they had a military cutback, and they kept deferring me, and the lawyers I was with in Farmington pretty much talked me out of going into it, and they let me resign the commission, and so I just kept practicing law from then on. I first practiced law with James B. Cooney in Farmington, then it became Cooney and Schlenker, and then it was Cooney, Schlenker, and Briones. And Briones was one of my best friends in law school, and he had a military commitment out of law school, and after he had served his 2 years, I got him to come to Farmington, and he's still there, and he and two of his sons who graduated from the UNM Law School, and they're all practicing law right now.
Wow, that's great. So then did you go from Farmington to New York, or you came back to Albuquerque or Portales?
No, I went to Farmington to New York, knowing that I probably would have to practice in Albuquerque to build a law practice, and there was only one real tax lawyer in New Mexico, a fellow named John Dwyer, and he was still here when I came back. Of course, we have quite a few tax lawyers now, and but I had contacts in Farmington, and I still have a few clients up there.
So how did you decide to go to NYU and pursue further education in tax?
Well, there were two programs going on at the time. One of them NYU and the other in Southern Cal. And when I talked to the professors, they all wanted me to go to NYU. They said that was the place to go. Mm-hmm. And apparently it was. The Southern Cal program, it no longer exists. There are a lot of other schools that do have some kind of a tax program now. I think even Denver may have something now. But yeah, that was why I went there. And I considered going to the Justice Department Tax Division, and the professors advised me against that. They said the real way to do is go to NYU. And I did get some job offers, I think because of the graduation from NYU.
So what was your year like in New York? Was your wife with you?
Yes, I had a wife and 3 children, and I commuted into to the Washington Square where the NYU Law School was, and did that for a year.
Where were you living?
What's that?
Where did you live in New York?
We lived in Plainfield, New Jersey.
Okay.
And the reason that we got there, I had a friend who was an engineer with a telephone company, and he was living in that vicinity and found us a place.
I imagine that was challenging, having your family there and trying to study and get all your coursework done.
Well, yeah, it was a little bit, but I've been active in the Presbyterian Church for many years. And of all things, we lived very close to a Presbyterian church, and they gave me a place to study so I could go in the daytime and let my wife take care of the kids. And then I had most of my classes at night. I started in an off semester, and I went through summer school, and that's where I met Philip Heckerling, who became a friend, and he's the fellow that they named all the University of Miami books after the estate planning books after Philip Heckerling, and he was already the head of the tax department at Miami, but he wanted to get an LLM in taxation from NYU. Yeah.
Okay, so once you finish your coursework in New York, did you come back to New Mexico?
Came back to New Mexico and had an office with Bob McCoy, who was practicing law then, and but he also right away became the first of the U.S. magistrates for New Mexico, and Burl Payne was our main district judge then, and he appointed McCoy. And the first litigation I had in the way of tax refund was before Judge Payne, and then later his son Jay Payne practiced with me. It became at one time Schlenker, Parker, Payne, and Welborn. Parker was a guy on the other side of a case I had, and we got well acquainted, and he was trying to get away from Roswell, New Mexico, and so he practiced with me, and he practices now in the Madro law firm, but he's practicing part time, and but I got a lot of referral work from the lawyers around the state, and that's where I could build a practice. And then I had a friend who was a special procedures officer at the IRS, and his name was Robert Blunt, and we got along quite well. When he took retirement from the IRS, he worked for me for 28 years after that.
Wow.
So we were together a long time, and he handled a lot of IRS collection work and offers in compromise and things of that kind.
Wow, sounds like you were had a very busy and successful tax practice.
Yes,
That's great.
very enjoyable, yeah.
Good. And it's my understanding you also participated in drafting and analyzing some legislation too in your career.
Oh, yeah. The one thing that was in our law at the time was that women in New Mexico did not have the power to will their share of the community property to anybody, and we were the only community property state that was that way. And with a couple of law professors, we tried at least twice to get that changed, but we had sort of a macho legislature, and we never got very far with it. But what really saved the day was the Equal Rights Amendment. When we were one of the states, we passed that on election in 1972, and so that, and I guess because of the tax angle, why the people who were there handled that for the state bar were Ann Bingham and John R. Cooney, who was the son of the guy I started practicing law with. But they had asked me to handle the part of it that related to taxation, and a lot of it did relate to taxation, so that I was involved in that. And then I think, and I had one of the things that I've written over the years was something for the law review. Let me see if I can find that. In 1973, which would be the next year after the Equal Rights Amendment passed, I wrote an article called Tax Implications of the Equal Rights Amendment, and that was in 1973 for the UNM Law School's law review, and let's see. Okay, yeah, that was it, and then I did a lot of work on that, and I had some teenage daughters, and I thought they would be very impressed if they knew what I was doing, and I talked to them about it, and they were at Del Norte High School at that time, and they didn't seem to be impressed as I thought they would be, but they were in a class over at Eastern New Mexico, and when the teacher of the class, who later became one of the Albuquerque judges, asked them if they might be related to me, and after he told them about all that I had done in connection with the Equal Rights Amendment, why, you would have thought I was their hero. But that was, I was started out with that, and we did get that part changed about the women's right to. In fact, we had to do estate planning sometimes by converting community property to tenancy in common, so that we could get some tax saving results on the estate planning we were doing at that time. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And then you also argued before the U.S. Supreme Court in Evco v. Jones. Can you tell us about that case?
Yeah. In fact, that case, I got to argue that before the court on election day, on which the Equal Rights Amendment was passed.
Oh, wow.
It was all on the same day.
Wow.
And but I had this. It's a New Mexico case, and the company Evco was a company that designed educational materials, and part of the original part of the case, we had some Indian law involved, but the final issue was whether or not the state of New Mexico had a right to tax the put the gross receipts tax on the proceeds of some material they had designed, and the material involved was the training manual for the IBM Selectric typewriter, and the EVCO made the material, and then sent the material back to Endicott, New York, where IBM made thousands of copies of the material, and the state of New Mexico claimed that the taxation was on the work product of and where our position was that it was on the when it was for the finished product, in effect, that it was tangible personal property as opposed to labor. And the New Mexico Court of Appeals and Judge Oman, he was the chief judge at that time, they ruled for us on the property being tangible personal property, but they ruled against us on saying that it was not in interstate commerce, and so I petitioned the United States Supreme Court, and they first sent it back to the New Mexico Court of Appeals and said they should reconsider. Well, then they had the whole thing argued over again and came up with an opinion saying, well, we reconsidered and we say it's not in interstate commerce. And then when I argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, I was lucky enough to get to argue that. And although it was a New Mexico case, the case ahead of me was United Airlines versus City of Chicago. It was definitely kind of a big deal for a country lawyer. And they almost told me immediately that I had won the case, and they asked me, who is this judge in New Mexico that that they thought that they should have, when that sending back for reconsideration meant that they were to change their mind. So they did hold for us, and I almost got another case to the New Mexico Supreme Court, and that was called Eastern Navajo Industries versus Tax and Revenue, and that one involved some of these corporations that were being formed at that time, which were so-called Indian corporations because maybe 51% of the shareholders were Indians, but they had very little to do with the operation. But this Eastern Navajo Industries made stock trailers in the city of Gallup, I believe. I believe it was within the city limits, and they were claiming exclusion because the Indian ownership. But Judge Sutton held for us on that one, and then the state of New Mexico tried to take that to the Supreme Court, and we opposed it. And I think the courts sort of favored Indians in Indian law, and that in those days maybe still do. I hadn't had any experience lately, but but the EVCO versus Jones was certainly a great pleasure to get to go before the court. And a lot of the IRS lawyers who I'd had dealings with at different places had never really seen anything at the Supreme Court, so I had quite a few people over there to watch the argument. And the state of New Mexico hired a lawyer who had formerly lived in New Mexico, but at that time lived in Washington, D.C. And he tried to re-argue whether it was tangible personal property or labor, but the court wouldn't let him talk about it.
Wow. So it sounds like your career evolved from civil practice to more tax. Would you say it evolved in other ways, especially after those arguments?
Well, even before, when I first started practicing law, we didn't have the Supreme Court decision requiring defendants to have representation. So all of the lawyers had to take a certain number of cases a week, which we didn't get paid for. I ended up with quite a few criminal cases that I wasn't really counting on, and then I have one of them that did go to the New Mexico Supreme Court that was Turnbull versus Commissioner, and we prevailed. It was and the issue was whether or not when a husband and wife were involved in a crime together, whether there was a presumption that the wife was coerced. And I represented the wife, and the court said that was still a good law. That, and I don't know whether that law has been changed or not, but yeah.
So, and you've done criminal, you've done tax. I know you've done estate planning. What other areas have you worked on throughout your career?
Well, I really liked, in law school we had a class on drafting legislation, and there's some kind of police organization that was interested in getting some parental responsibility legislation. So I drafted that for them, and that made the parents liable for the malicious acts of their children in the destruction of other people's property, pretty much. And that one passed, and a while back I looked in the statutes and noticed that there's still a version of that was law, and and I also worked for the Municipal League a little bit. I was Mr. Cooney's assistant there in the city of Farmington, and I drafted a lot of airport legislation. I was involved in flying myself and was interested in that, airplanes, and then later ballooning. Yeah. But that was it. And that was about it.
Did you have any mentors or any people that influenced you or helped you during your career as a lawyer?
James B. Cooney, the fellow that I first worked for. I owe a lot to him because he let me have experience sooner than you would expect, really. And I found out how much easier it was to practice law than it was to go to law school.
So when you were in law school, did you imagine this career that you would have, or did you imagine something different?
No, I didn't think about taxation, which is what I ended up in for all these years. And they had tax courses, but I wasn't interested in them, and I thought it was the last thing I'd ever be interested in. But that's happened to a lot of lawyers, I find, that they end up in an area where they didn't realize they would be.
Yep, that's right. Were there any organizations or associations that you worked with during your career that you're particularly proud of? I know you mentioned Ann Bingaman, who chaired that state bar committee. Are there any others?
No, I don't think of much. I was pretty active in Democratic politics for quite a while, but no, I can't really think of anything else.
Can you tell us a bit about your family, your wife, and your children?
Yes, my wife, my first wife, passed away in 2011. She had dementia and Alzheimer's. And then I subsequently married a woman from Mexico. We've been married about going on 6 years now, and we have a home near Guadalajara, Mexico. We live.
Very nice.
And since I'm about to retire, we're looking forward to living part of the time in Guadalajara and part of the other time in our home in Los Lunas, New Mexico. And my children, my oldest daughter teaches at Hope Christian School, and teaches drama, and she went, her education was in theater as well as in college, and she's got a master's degree in education, I guess. And then my daughter Cindy is the Bernalillo County agent now. She's the head of the extension service here, and she has a master's from New Mexico State, and she's also employed there. And my son is a CPA, and he has a bachelor's and master's both from Baylor University in Waco, Texas. And his specialty was his master's is in tax, just like mine is, only his is for accounting and mine was for law. So we've been lucky enough a time or two to get to work together, but we agreed years ago that we would never recommend each other to any client. I mean, that's worked out real fine. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And what about what are your primary interests or hobbies outside of work?
Well, I've had a lot of things really. One of my hobbies was adobe building.
Oh, wow.
And I formed the New Mexico Adobe Builders Association along the way because I got to know a lot of those people who were contractors. But I built a home in Placitas, and then was also built a pretty big addition onto the Placitas church out there, the Presbyterian Church in Placitas, New Mexico. And I took some Adobe courses from a fellow named P.G. McHenry, who was a architect Adobe guy who wrote a book called Adobe Build It Yourself. And also I was involved with a publication called the Adobe News that was published out of Los Lunas years ago. And let's see, and the other thing was flying, both flying and flying balloons, and I've been involved in that. I had 3 different airplanes and just one balloon, but I gave it to the Balloon Museum when I decided I was getting too old to do some things anyway. But I guess that was about it. Yeah.
How'd you get involved in flying? What made you decide to do that?
Oh, I wanted to early on, and when I went to Farmington, it was an area that had a lot of airplanes. And I started doing a little work for a fellow named Art Montgomery, who was an old-time flyer. And I started taking flying lessons from him, and then also bought an airplane from him. And then later bought another airplane with another fellow. And I had to sell the airplane to go back to school. Then when I went back to New York, sold an airplane and a house to go back there and re-educate myself. And that was about, but I got interested in flying from that. There was so much flying going on in Farmington that it was just, and nowhere are there a lot of small planes anymore, it seems like, but that was a different day.
Right. So what would you say would be your most significant contribution to the law and to the state?
Well, I think the legislation in connection with the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yeah, that's great. Can you maybe describe how the practice of law or our legal community has changed since the beginning of your career to now when you're retiring?
Well, the biggest thing that I notice every day is lawyers advertising on television, and that was unheard of, And in fact, when I was chairman of this little disciplinary panel, that was Tom Cornish and Pam Minsner, a lot of the complaints against lawyers involved advertising, which was prohibited at that time, and thanks to a Supreme Court decision later that opened the door, why we see lawyers who I would suspect have very little experience advertising and spending a lot of money for advertising. But I think that's the main thing I see that's different and also is not good, but in my view,
So, do you have any words of wisdom for young lawyers?
I don't know that I do, although I have a grandson who's a lawyer for the Justice Department Immigration Division. He would be full of ideas, I'm sure, but he's been out of law school just a year, and he's working out of San Antonio. And but I can see it's a different world in a lot of ways. I think one thing that's helpful too, and of course we got more litigation, but I really have always thought that since we've had this court-appointed arbitration by lawyers, and I think that's a good thing, and it's something that we don't get paid for, but is very worthwhile, I think, and it really takes some of the burden off the courts. I think that's a good deal.
Are there any other aspects of your life or your career that you want to share with us today?
No, I think that's about it. I've had some good law partners. That's something I do want to say. Is the New Mexico Supreme Court, that I was a clerk for, they had, there's 5 judges, still 5, and then we have the Court of Appeals. And of the 5 judges on the Supreme Court, for the first time, 3 judges are women, and 2 of those women have been law clerks for me over the years.
Oh, wow.
Barbara V. Hill especially, and Judy Nakamura, who's now the Chief Justice. But now she wasn't a law clerk so much, but she was a partner when we were in the Miller Stratford Torgerson Schlenker law firm, and I'm glad to see that. And another law clerk of mine just retired from the Court of Appeals, and that was Tim Garcia, and he had clerked for me when he was in law school, and so.
You had mentioned you had some good law partners too.
Oh yeah, I sure have, and I have, of course, Mr. Cooney. I owe a lot to, but Jim Parker, he recently was in the Albuquerque Journal for his interest in playing baseball and helping kids, and so I mean they've done some good things outside. And Chuck Welborn was a good lawyer, and he worked for UNM for a while afterward on some of their projects, and Jay Payne, whose father was our federal judge, and his brother Vern was on our Supreme Court at one time, and Jay was my partner. He was extremely active in the Mormon Church and held high offices and all that. But he died on his 36th birthday. He had a lot of promise, but I've had some good partners and also some good associates. Dean Constantine, who's here, I hired him for the Miller Stratford Torres and Schlenker law firm, and we practiced there. And then after I left there, he left just a short while, and we've actually been together in some kind of relationship for God knows how many years, 20 or more anyway. But Sandy Craig, she was a law clerk for Judge Oliver Seth. She started out as a law clerk for me, then Oliver Seth, then she became my partner, and then she taught until she retired at the University of Kansas Law School, and she was a good one too. But I just had a lot of good connections. John Cooney and Ann Bingaman too. We had sort of after the Equal Rights Amendment passed, we sort of put on a road show around the state for the bankers and lawyers and what have you. So,
That's great. So what do you hope your legacy is to the legal profession?
Well, I don't know. I think the one that'll be influenced is my grandson, and also I had a client who has established a scholarship in my name at the University of New Mexico Law School, and I think this will be the third year coming up that we have. I don't know that much about it, but they asked me what I would like to have. Well, they asked her. She said, "You ask Kendall." And but the only thing that I could suggest was that they alternate between men and women on who gets the scholarship. And that's the way it is. So that's. But I don't know that. I don't know about any legacy. I might. Maybe my daughters now think differently, but hey.
Anything else you want to share?
No, I had some notes here, but I think we've covered better with your questions than what I had, and no, I think that's fine, and I think it's a good thing that the bar's doing. I don't know whether they pick the oldest lawyer or just how they're doing this, but I like the idea. Yeah.
Well, I think you are selected because you've had such a long, diverse career and have made a big impact on our state with the work that you've done. So
Good.
I want to thank you for participating in our oral history project and wish you the best in your retirement.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, great.
Yep.
Thank you.